So guys, how was that as an experience, getting your business rules on there?
I liked it.
Did you spot any really stupid ones?
Yeah.
We're just commenting on how easy it was to type.
Yeah, the really good one.
That's really good.
Yeah.
And of course, once you start mapping the business rules to your customer experiences, you sort of think, well, is that still relevant? You know, and so often there's an interpretation of business rules which revolves around, oh, we've got to do that for regulatory reasons. But again, that's an interpretation. It's not it may not actually be the regulation. So they're sort of a rich ground, a fertile ground to actually be able to discover an opportunity to eradicate them. All right. Now, with the moments of truth, the handovers, and the business rules, you obviously identified a whole bunch of points of failure. There are places where things can and do go wrong. So in the moments of truth, I'm going to do a sort of a calculation which tells you the degree of brokenness of the process. All right, and then we'll see where that leads us. But just as an aid memoir, when you're thinking about this, getting these things really clear in your head. Penny, could you just set the light for a moment or two, please? Thanks. So getting these things really clear in your head is important because, of course, if you're running workshops and the people in the workshops, if you're confused, it's hellish confusing for everybody else in the workshop. So you need to be really specific about what these are. So a task is a piece of work to be done or undertaken. All right? And why we said done or undertaken, you might be looking at tasks in a future state. So that's the reason it says that. A moment of truth is any interaction with a customer. And remember, the customer experience is the process, so it transcends our organisation. Goes way outside the boundaries of it. A handover is any interaction not directly with the customer. So again, across the customer experience, with all the players who are involved in delivering that customer experience. So often you'll get the feedback from people which says, well, we're not responsible for that because that's outside the scope of ourselves. But you've created that customer experience by the way you determined you want to do business. So again, a handover, any interaction not directly with the customer. And then a business rule, any decision point within the process. All right. The area of greatest difficulty for people is usually around tasks. You know, just it's a piece of work that's undertaken. Because frequently you'll find that when you've got a task, all right, you'll find a moment of truth in association with it, and your inclination is to call it the same thing. But they are not one and the same. They are separate. They are mutually exclusive. They are different things. Make sense? So we'll come back to that again, probably later on tomorrow. The other thing you could do with the current state now is you could do what we call causal flow. And some of you were working on that. So for instance, there's on this one here, where we actually sort of send a letter, and then there's a moment, when we make a phone call to Terry, there's also a handover, which is like the prep for the call. You know, get the data so we can actually do it. Now, if you did a causal flow, what you'd be saying is that that handover precedes that moment of truth. So on the timeline, you can actually show the handover in relationship to the moment of truth on the basis of when it occurred. Does that make sense? So here's an example, for instance. This moment of truth causes this handover, which causes this handover, which causes that handover, which then causes that moment of truth. And this moment of truth causes that moment of truth, causes this handover, and so on down the line. Now, in the real world, we'll sometimes do that to demonstrate whether the process is proactive or reactive. But just by looking at it, how would I know whether it's a proactive or a reactive process? Without knowing the content of it, just looking at the structure, how would I know?
The customer's coming to us, or we're going to the customer.
Yeah. A proactive process will have the handovers preceding the moments of truth. The handovers will actually cause the moments of truth. All right. A reactive process, which is this is one you've got here, is we're all waiting for Terry's contact all the time before we then do something. That's a very reactive process. It means it's we have less control over it than if it was a proactive process. Okay? And again, we'll revisit that when we do another sort of case study later on. So in terms of identifying the causal flow, in the real world we would do this now, because then it shows people the placement of the relationships between handovers and moments of truth, and then the underpinning business rules which drive that behaviour.